Hello, this is Mad Cat, and welcome to another edition of Dicks and Boobs. Oh wait, Boobs and Dicks, right? Boobs and Dicks smash the matriarchy. I always get the dicks and boobs messed up. I don't know why. I'm the one who created it. This is a very special episode. We have some special guests with us today. And as always, I am Dicks.
And I'm Boobs.
Today we have Steve Moxon, and we also have Elizabeth. Steve he's an academic writer, but he's not really linked to anyone specifically, which makes him perfect, as he's written a book about the actual differences between genders. Unlike regular academia that seems to want to make a big, huge difference between them two and then add 30 more in there, he actually says there's clear differences. And then also Elizabeth today, who I've known for a couple of months now. She is actually the main villain of my play, The Feminists, because every evil person has to be British. So, how are you two doing today?
Fine.
Me, I'm happy and tired.
All right. Well, let's start with you, Elizabeth. Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Okay, I am an anti-feminist libertarian. I have written a couple of things, made a few videos. I'm doing quite a lot of stuff this year, working with Steve Brule on a project called the Liberty Bells, where we'll be terroring some feminists, a couple of new arseholes, hopefully. And I'm also giving some speeches on isolation, which will be exciting. And I'm a stay-at-home mum. That's me.
So she's into assholes and
mom?
genitalia.
My partner says, like, why are you so obsessed with other men's penises?
That's great.
It's a fair question.
And Steve, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm the author of a book called The Woman Racket, and just out, Sex Difference Explained, from DNA to Society, purging gene copy errors. I got into all this lark by the back door, really. I did psychology at university decades ago. Didn't get on with it. Didn't get on with academia. But through a long, convoluted explanation I'll not bore you with, I'm sort of independent of, non-affiliated is the term. I don't belong to any university. So I'm outside academia, but at the same time within it, if you see what I mean. I write papers, get published in science journals and occasional books.
Awesome.
Can I make a quick correction? In the introduction, Mad Cat, you said the differences between the genders.
Sexes.
But we're actually talking about the difference between the sexes. Yeah, sexes.
What are we, a peer review? I didn't realize there would be a quiz afterwards.
Gender, sexes. What's the difference now? I'm just kidding.
Really, there isn't a difference between gender and sex.
Yeah, but the problem is that gender is an abusive terminology. It's been borrowed from use in study of languages, and it's been appropriated by political extremists to signal that the sexes are socially constructed rather than actually biologically based. And that's why ideologues like to use the word gender. I hate the term and I avoid it, and I put it in scare quotes and followed by sick whenever I use it.
Gender and sex. Oh, wait, you can't see me do air quotes because I don't have my camera on.
Yeah.
It's been very funny. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Now, your book discusses the idea that gender is not a social construct, but well, actually sex. I should have put sex in there, not gender, but who cares? But a natural biological process, and that modern academia and even science has been politicized. Now, my view of these schools of thought seem to start with the conclusion and then work backwards. And to quote your book specifically, the basis of science, it hardly needs restating, is that any and every theory has to stand or fall on the evidence. In other words, theory has to have the potential to be shown to be false. Otherwise, it cannot be considered a theory by definition, which is beautifully put. So why is it your book is held to this standard, that you yourself have held yourself to this standard, whereas modern academia does the other way around? They start with a conclusion and then look for evidence. So why did you?
I don't think that's true. Sorry, I don't think that's true in hard science, in biology. Where there is a problem is in a lot of social science. So within the particular study they're doing, that they're looking at evidence and arriving at a conclusion. The problem is they're starting with inappropriate premises. For example, that misogyny is something that's real. There's no scientific evidence for the existence of misogyny at all. Yet an awful lot of studies into misogyny, obviously they start with the premise. And that's the problem. There's so much in social sciences, sociology, is just tautological. It just goes round in circles. So there's it may be internally consistent. Obviously, a thing fits together within itself, but it doesn't actually relate to anything outside. In other words, it's got no, use the term, external validity, and that's a big problem. Obviously, in straight biology, then everything's fairly hunky-dory, except even then things are skewed, because if you want to, for example, look at how the difference between boys and girls, between males and females, you're hard put to get any stream of funding, because all the funding streams are predicated on the idea the sexes are functionally identical, and so that just the by virtue of how you can and cannot get funding actually determines a lot of directions of research programs. Hello, you there?
Elizabeth, do you want to?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm just wondering, with the current narrative we have of patriarchy theory being that men are the cause of all the problems in the world, and being born with a penis and desiring women is the worst crime you can commit, just like in our play, Chris. Your book deviates from this narrative. So are you scared of being dismissed in academia or laughed at?
Well, I'm not scared of it, and obviously it happens. So given that I'm not actually technically within academia myself anyway, then I'm not in a position where I've got anything to lose. So I'm sort of climbing up from the bottom, as it were. I mean, quite a lot of people in academia did get on with the woman racket, although that was actually more problematic in this respect than the current book's an attempt to write something in scholarly terms ahead of a more popular version. The woman racket really, it started off as polemic. Then as I researched it, the science got more interesting, and it ended up really falling between two stools. So on the one hand, it was polemic. On the other hand, it was an attempt to do popular science. But despite that, quite a few people in academia did find it quite good. And Bruce Charlton is a professor in English psychology at Newcastle University here in Britain and Buckingham. He sent a rave review of the manuscript, to the publisher. That's the only reason it actually got published, and I got into writing papers in his and other academic journals as a result of that. So academia is not a totally closed world. There are an awful lot of people who would like to write on this sort of topics themselves, but don't, because they'd fear losing their jobs. So I'm sort of act for some people, a minority admittedly, as a bit of a conduit.
Well, it's unfortunate that people need to be scared, and it seemed like once upon a time that there was a lot more freedom, but um,
That's
and
certainly changed, yes.
and to go off that, as you say in your book, a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's an emperor's new clothes scenario, where the assiduous imposition of speech codes, according to identity politics imperative, dissuades all but a brave and reckless few daring to pick the illusionary bubble.
Mhm.
And for what you've just said, that really works out, that quote in your book. And I mean, do you consider yourself to be one of these brave and reckless few, or did you just say, hey, I see a lot of evidence, this is what conclusions I drew from it?
Well, that's how I try to present it. Of course, my interest, I mean, I fall out with things like, I'm in a walking group in Sheffield, and they get complaints from people on walks saying, I've talked about this, and I get the president of the walking groups society saying, emailing me saying, my views, and I said, look, I don't have or express views. My interest is the evidence, and the evidence actually isn't. She says that my stuff is controversial. I says, no, it's not controversial amongst the majority of people. The majority of people in South Yorkshire, in Britain, actually are full of common sense. They don't agree with the metropolitan elite view that male and female are identical, and that sex differences, in as much as there are any, are caused by environment, by social construction. Most ordinary people know intuitively that's complete bollocks. And so then the evidence from science backs that up. Yet at the same time, despite saying that, yes, I'm still considered obviously a maverick, and people, the routine every day I get accused of misogyny. I sort of distort the word to show my contempt for it. And all the other PC isms that you regularly get chucked to you. I'm not brave because, as I say, I came out over a decade ago now. I used to work in the civil service. And I'm not going to bore you with all that story, but I became a whistleblower. And I got charged with all the racism stuff there, and that's a lot more toxic, I think, than the charges of misogyny. So I'm well used to all these charges. So and I can only go up from all the misrepresentations of me anyway. So I'm not brave. I'm just trying to get out of a hole, as it were.
Can we go back to the social constructivism for a minute? I just want to read a passage to you and ask you to elaborate on it. So you say, the social constructivist view of the sexes is a self-contradiction of a sort that may hold in quantum mechanics and conjecturing in multiverse, but cuts no ice in psychology. The sexes are supposed identical, yet at the very same time, one sex is held somehow to oppress the other in some foundational way through the nebulously envisaged structure or dynamic of patriarchy, which amounts to nothing less tautological than maleness. No sense can be made of putting these two groundless, non-scientific positions together. It would be impossible for males to somehow conspire putatively to oppress in their patriarchy, if indeed this was itself a coherent notion of some real phenomenon capable of being perpetrated, and for females not to do likewise if there were no such thing as sex difference.
Well, that's quite verbose, isn't it? It looks better on the page than maybe read out. But yeah, that's the crux of it thing. I mean, it's like juggling two balls in the air. I mean, you've got two irreconcilable things, completely opposites, and you juggle them in the air, and eventually, obviously, the whole juggling exercise has got to crash to the ground, because as it does regularly, and which is why feminists have to flip constantly from seeing identicality between the sexes on the one hand, when it suits them, and then on the other hand, also when it suits them in a different context, they've got to say males and females are chalk and cheese, and they have to maintain that chalk and cheese notion if they're at the same time to hold the idea that somehow men are oppressing women. I mean, if men and women are identical, then self-evidently one can't oppress the other. So clearly there's a contradiction there. It's an obvious, self-evident contradiction to everybody except feminists. And I don't know how they've managed to get away with it over these decades. It's a constant I mean, it just shows you the power of how we defer to the feminine, and you know, anything that women or anybody on behalf of women can say is okay. It can be any amount of fatuous nonsense, and people seem to swallow it and don't question it. And it's only recently, you know, through the social media that there's any sort of serious questioning of this going on, apart from a few genuinely brave souls, not like me, people like Neil Linden, sorry, his name is
Linden,
yeah, whose book No More Sex War, I think, was probably the first book, well before Warren Farrell's Myth of Male Power. And there's a book called Not Guilty by another British guy who also got buried in the media, and he got lambasted and lost his career through it. These are the really brave souls.
Neil Linden's life was destroyed by that book, wasn't it?
Right. I came along in what really got me interested was Warren Farrell's book, and then I thought, well, hang on, Warren Farrell, it's a great book, and I've exchanged emails with Warren Farrell these days, but of course he's not looking at it from a biological point of view. He doesn't explain. He brilliantly outlines what all the issues where the feminists have got wrong are, but he doesn't explain them, because he starts from the standard social science model, as it's called, you know, the standard idea of social construction. And of course, that leaves everything in the air, because it doesn't explain what the differences are. So I thought, hang on, there's a role for me here. I can write a book in the wake of the Myth of Male Power, trying to actually explain where all this guff comes from.
Well, I think the reason why feminism can say on one hand that women can do anything that men can do, and that there is no differences between the genders, and then go on to say that, well, everything is the fault of men, the reason why society is so bad and why women are always oppressed, because women, these women specifically, need to feel empowered, but at the same time feed on being a victim. They need both. But in truth, you can't both be empowered and be a victim. It's a contradiction of the term. So it's like at any one moment in time, you're one or the other. You can't ever be both. And yet they believe they can be both and don't see the logical inconsistencies of trying to be both. That's why they can have this narrative of men and women are the exact same, but men are to blame for everything.
Yeah. Well, of course, what's missing in all that is, and before I got the book on my webpage, I mean, the top line on the webpage was, it's not about, I forget the exact words now, but it's not about that women can't do these things. Obviously, there's always a minority of women can be firefighters or whatever. The big sex difference is not in ability, it's in motivation. So no matter how many, you know, feminists, and how you can always get a minority of people, you know, women on the board, a CEO of a major multinational corporation. But the point is the pool of not just talent, but the pool of people of a female sex who actually want to even begin on the road to get there is actually very small. Whereas all men generally want to strive to get some sort of status. Now, obviously, all men are not going to be in a position or want to become CEOs. Men are very good at sort of putting their eggs in one basket. They from an early age, they get to know where the talents lie and actually go in that direction. But generally, men want to actually climb a status hierarchy, which is, you know, male mate value. Climbing a status hierarchy is a measure of male value. It's not at all, in any way at all, a measure of female mate value. Therefore, females, it's a factor, don't want to do that, and that's the big thing that feminists miss. And missing that is part of the reason why feminists, get their knickers in a twist big time over all this.
Well, what I find in the feminist camp, because you're perfectly right, it's all about motivation. And their motivation seems more focused on trying to point out what everyone is doing wrong rather than trying to work themselves to make the difference. I mean, the biggest issue that I see lately is with the fire departments. Right. I think it was New York Fire Department that got sued for $50 million because they don't have enough women. And it's like, that's not their fault, you know, but the feminists were saying, well, it's because they set the standard too high for women to be able to join. So the fire department, as a result of losing $50 million, had to lower the standards for women in order to pass. And it's like, these standards are not designed to be against women. These standards are to save lives. And yet it's like
that woman trying to knock down the door and she can't do it, right?
No, I haven't seen that video.
Yeah, firefighters. It's like this woman. She's a proud woman firefighter, and she goes through like a normal. She has to break down a door, and I'm surprised you haven't seen it.
No. I've seen one where, there's female police officers who are trying to subdue a perpetrator, and they can't. He's just too big for them, and he's regular size, but these women are small and can't actually tackle him down.
Similar thing happened here in the UK with the army. The army, here, like in America, have been infected by the PC virus. And so they actually did. Now, I'm not sure they actually had lower standards. I think they had slightly in some respects. It's all hidden, of course. It's not publicly discussed. So in some respects, they did lower the standards, or they tried to pretend the standards were the same for both sexes. The result of that is that only one woman got through. And I think then she didn't want to do it anyway. And so all that effort, all that money, and was completely wasted, which beautifully illustrated the fact that there isn't the pool of female motivation there to get through the thing anyway. And the other thing is, of course, is that it's not just ability to actually physically do the actual tasks. It's the high injury rate sustained by females in the actual process, and the fire departments find this as well. So it ends up incredibly costly to actually get this. But you start off with a small pool of women who are interested. It's very expensive because you've got to cope with all this injury, all the rehabilitation, along the pathway to that as well.
All right. So going more to your book once again. In your book, which I really love that you mentioned this because I didn't know this, and I wish this kind of information was more readily available to the general public. But you mentioned that 90% of females throughout history had at least one child, but only 40% of men had children at all. Now, you go on to explain RIT, Atmar's male genetic filter, also known as mutational cleanser. Kind of prefer the first one because the second one sounds like a cleaning product. Can you give more explanation of that and how it relates to the imprinting of active genes in children being primarily from their fathers?
Well, the latter point, it's only just been discovered that it's not just a question of what genes you get, it's what genes you get and are expressed. And it's not fully understood at all. It's only partially understood now, only just been discovered that most of the genes that you have in terms of actually what are expressed are from your father or from your mother. And that's quite a big discovery. It's amazing that it's only just been discussed. The genetic filter thing, how do I go about explaining that? Now, I'm feeling a bit tongue-tied now. This is Vert Atmas, now dead unfortunately, in 1991. He wrote a book called On the Role of Males. Absolutely groundbreaking. And how can I explain this? I'm feeling tongue-tied suddenly. The big problem, this is a root problem, as I talk about fairly early on in the book, is that the big problem in biological systems is how do you keep the DNA intact? Obviously, you've got this coding mechanism, DNA genes. The problem is it's pretty delicate stuff, and through the rough and tumble of reproduction and life, a lot of this stuff gets wrecked in various ways. You have to maintain the integrity of it. How do you do this? The accumulation of gene replication error, particularly mutations. How do you deal with this? If you have all individuals actually dealing, having some mechanisms to deal with this. Obviously, that's going to take effort and resources away from dropping sprogs, from reproduction. So this is the basis of why we have not sex, but the sexes. Sex arose before you had separate males and females. So obviously females, look at any species, ours not excluded, females, despite what feminists say, normal females, their life really is geared, their whole psychology, their sociality, and what they actually do is very much geared to reproduction. They're the ones that obviously gestate the embryo, they have the kids, they rear it, etc. Males obviously spend all the time fighting amongst each other to these status hierarchies to get status, so that some female or other will actually choose them to actually father their kids. So the male whole half of the lineage, they're the ones that actually, the reason males go into being was to deal with this accumulation of gene replication error, and the obviously the big way of doing this is to fight amongst themselves for status, so that the ones that don't have status, they enter reproductive oblivion, as it were. Females don't choose them, and the reason they're low status is because that's a measure of genetic quality. So the low genetic quality guys take all the dodgy genes out of the gene pool with them, and the problem. There are lots of other mechanisms. I mean, the reason why males are XY and females are XX, all the dodgy genes they're just one copy in the males, and that's not going to be in sex chromosomes masked by another copy. Females have got two X's, so if they have one dodgy X on one X chromosome and a healthy healthy gene on the other X, then that healthy gene masks the other one. That doesn't happen in males. There's lots of different mechanisms, and this latest discovery that most genes are actually expressed from males is part of this as well. So this is a big insight. Vert Atmar really was the first person, and he's an interesting guy. He died of an heart attack, unfortunately, recently. But he was an electronics engineer, but also a theoretical biologist at the same time. And of course, he's a great example of an outsider, as I hope I am too. Is an outsider really to biology. He fused expertise from computational systems to look at biology and really understood this, which everybody else had missed. And it's a fundamental insight into biology.
Okay, can we move on to my pet hate now and talk about circumcision?
All right.
That
My
worked for
pet hate
everybody?
too.
So you suggest that the policing of males that occurs culturally could not be more starkly apparent than in circumcision or male genital mutilation. I think we should call it that.
Absolutely.
There are various extreme forms traditionally practiced in some cultures, but even partial foreskin removal is a serious mutilation, given that it's no mere covering of the penis, but a most important feature of it. The foreskin is the part of the penis with the densest set of nerve endings and is integral to the mechanics of sexual intercourse, so its removal severely denudes sexual sensitivity, thereby reducing inclination for seeking extra-pair sex or responding to an invitation to so indulge. MGM, then, is a most direct cultural extension of policing males, yet so core to sociality is the policing of males that nobody so much as notices that MGM is indeed policing, despite it being so brutally apparent. Instead, the custom is rationalized, most commonly as a supposed health benefit, when actually the reverse is the case. The foreskin traps antimicrobial secretions against the meatus of the penis so as to carry away harmful bacteria when it emerges as smegma. For rather understandable reasons, circumcised men often deny that their sexual performance is in any sense muted, or they may be under an illusion that through their own more vigorous performance that MGM entails, the relative lack of sensitivity likely leads to more forceful thrusting, which might be taken to indicate undiminished or even enhanced sexuality, which is something I've heard an awful lot from circumcised men when they're defending it.
Yeah.
However, you have Kellogg's who said it was necessary to keep people from masturbating, and also Maimonides in I think it's the 6th century, he was a Muslim sort of theologian. He said, the purpose of circumcision is to bring about a decrease in sexual intercourse and a weakening of the sexual organ. Circumcision does not perfect what is defective physically, it perfects what is defective morally. The bodily pain caused to that member is the real purpose of circumcision. Although procreation is not rendered impossible, the lust and pleasures beyond which are needed are diminished. I suppose the question I have to ask you, really, given that it's something that I'm engaged in, is what do you think it's going to take for our society to see MGM for what it really is and to outlaw it?
Good question. I mean, I presume in America now, obviously, it's a very different issue here in the UK. Apart from Jewish people, I don't think any other major group, presumably some Muslim groups, I don't know much about circumcision in Muslim groups to comment. But it's not the same situation here in the UK and Europe at all, I don't think, as in America, where, as I understand it, large sections of the non-Jewish population in the USA are also circumcised for reasons obviously to do with your religious history. So you've got a problem there, but I imagine people are becoming a bit more enlightened about it, and that is decreasing. I've not seen the stats for that. So presumably one reason why it's not recognised. Sorry.
Steadily. It is decreasing slowly and steadily.
Yeah. So presumably that's going to have an impact on when you've got, as I understand it, there was an overwhelming majority of American males were circumcised. Certainly at one time, if not now, that obviously would cloud it. But when it's more like 50-50 or it becomes a minority, then presumably things happen. But then again, if you look at the UK, the situation in the UK, there's not much discussion of it because it is a minority issue, because it's only either marginal groups or a very prominent group, Jewish groups, but they're a small number where it affects. So it's not really a part of public discourse. I mean, people are aware of it because there's a lot of discussion here about FGM, of course, even though that's a terrible minority because it's only certain marginal ethnic groups where this impacts, because feminists make a lot of it. I think the big mystery, well, the big breakthrough in understanding about genital mutilation generally, of course, is that it's not an imposition of men, because it's women who practice it, women who support it. On any measure of how you look at control and practice of MGM, it's a female within women, a female intersexual phenomenon. And all surveys showing in various parts of the world where there's MGM widely practiced, that it's the men who don't support it. Certainly men don't practice it apart from when it's being medicalized, or it might be on occasion the male village barber, but usually it's a matriarch or a specialist female cutter in the village or wherever. The big thing that one of the big things that feminists have covered up, despite lots of research, and I quote a lot of this in the new book, is trying to block from exposure to the public the fact that it is a female within sex phenomenon. It's nothing to do with the dreaded patriarchy, sick at all. Now, I think once that gets through, and I think that will get through, then I think there'll be questions in America about MGM as well. So I think, again, it's part of this big dam that's set to burst.
Well, you are definitely correct that even today, there's still a majority of boys who are brought into this world that are circumcised. And in fact, the hospitals actually really push this onto parents. And me and Hannah Wallen, we actually did a research together, and we discovered that there is actually a very big market for foreskins, and that hospitals, the reason why they push it so much is not for any medical reason, but because they're living cells that can be sold for a high price, that can be used in a number of things, including cosmetics.
Oprah Winfrey wears it.
Yeah.
Oprah Winfrey wears anti-aging cream made with baby boys' foreskins.
Absolutely
Why?
bizarre. I thought you were going to say China. Some aphrodisiac in China. utterly bizarre, isn't it? I mean, it does amaze us in the UK, these vestigial, bizarre things in America. Things like this occasionally come through, and we just stand there open mouthed and wonder what the hell's going on.
Hey, I was open mouth. It was like, Oprah's doing what? What?
Yeah.
You're using something like that because, you know, up until that time, I just thought, you know, it was just thrown away. You know, you cut it off, throw it away. That's that. But it's like, no, there's a big cosmetic industry behind it. There's, you know, medical research that takes this and studies it for whatever thing they're working on, whether it's some sort of treatment, cure, disease, what have you. They use this. And that's why hospitals push it out so much, that this should get done. And they don't even properly prepare children, well, not children, but they don't properly prepare parents on the consequences of it. That there are cases where they end up cutting too much and the penis can't function sexually.
Well, so it doesn't function properly sexually, even with the most common and least invasive, if you want to call it that, methods. I mean, because as I said in the book, I mean, there's plenty of papers on this. It's not as though it's an unknown scientific fact. I mean, the largest innovation of the penis is the foreskin. And you know, it's essential to normal sexual function in just the same way as it you wouldn't rationally remove a clitoris from a female for the same reason. It's absolute barbarity, and so there's no shortage of research on this. So it is a mystery how this has been kept from the public. And of course, in Africa, the rationalisation is, oh, it protects you from HIV. The theory is that removing the foreskin means you get a degree of keratinization of the meatus, i.e. it becomes sort of less like you know, an epithelium, and but there's no actual research, as far as I know, when I've looked for this. There's no actual evidence that this actually does decrease HIV rates. There might be some correlation studies, because correlation studies do not show causation.
Well,
so again,
yeah, there's the correlation study in sub-Saharan Africa among adult men. And, you know, I wonder whether actually the slight decreased incidence of AIDS might have been either because the men had a period of healing when they weren't having sex, or maybe that they decided to, or got some useful advice and started practicing safer sex afterwards using condoms, or maybe that the kind of men who go in for these procedures are careful anyway. But also, if you're talking about correlation, then you've got to look at the correlation between the US, that has a high incidence of circumcision combined with high incidence of AIDS or HIV and STDs, versus Europe, which has a low incidence of circumcision combined with low incidence of HIV and STDs. Yeah. So there's obviously more to it than circumcision.
That's right. And what about other studies specifically of gay males? Was that be the test, wouldn't it? Because presumably in America, gay males, like other males, most of them are circumcised, whereas in Europe that's not the case. So that if you just looked specifically at gay males and looked at HIV incidence according to whether or not they're circumcised, that might be interesting. Because it's not going to be interesting, because it's highly unlikely that there's any effect at all. It's just part of the stupid rationalizations we've had down the years, you know, starting with the idea that it's cleaner. And this idea that it's cleaner is a particularly bizarre idea.
Well, and I've actually spoken to a feminist social justice warrior friend about this issue, and she was like, oh yeah, you got to circumcise the baby because, you know, they can get a disease. And I'm like, well, I've looked up those stats, and 1 in 1,000 boys could potentially get a disease that you're describing. But then it's like 1 in 8 girls will get breast cancer in their lifetime. And by that logic, when a girl is born, we should just take the breasts off completely. But one thing that I did is I showed her a video. Steven, I can never say his last name. It starts with an M. It's like Monomo. I don't really like
Stefan Molyneux.
Yeah, I don't really like his politics, but when he does videos talking about studies, it is brilliant. And he did one on circumcision. And after she saw that video, she was convinced that if she ever had a son, she would not circumcise him.
This is the big thing, isn't it? I mean, I'm just clapping hands there. I mean, in a case in point, what kills feminism is when feminists become mothers and they have sons. I think that's what really. And Elizabeth obviously is exactly in exactly that position. And so many women I know and they've done a 180-degree turn from feminism when they've realised how their sons are treated in school. And that there's all this political absolute nonsense, which obviously is going to stack up against them.
All right, so I'm going to go back to another part of your book. We're going to switch topics here. And we're going to talk about misogyny.
Before we change topics.
What's up?
I just wanted to say that about your question, Elizabeth, at the beginning to Steve, about how you think society will or what will push society to change or to see what's really happening. I already mentioned this in the chat, but I think that lots of, I guess, pushing it in their faces, just showing them videos, showing them articles and stuff about either like actual circumcisions or male genital mutilation, or just like stories about how men and babies have been like affected by like just horror stories that do exist. Because I mean, I remember when me and Mad Cat and Andrew, my boyfriend, we went to the Red Pill event. I'd never seen a video of someone getting circumcised. He's circumcised, and he cringed really hard. You know, he was like, "Oh my God, that's fucking awful." Yeah, and I just think that the more people see that, the more people will realize that it's not just a normal thing. It's not a normal procedure. You know, it's not something necessary. It's just like female genital mutilation. It's not. Oh.
Elizabeth's been intruded by family.
Oh, don't worry. I put her on mute. And I think you're 100% correct on that. I think we do need to show. We can't hear you. I muted you. You have to unmute yourself, Elizabeth.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I was just going to agree with Medusa. Like, you know, Chris, you've already saved one boy potentially. I know I've saved at least one boy potentially. And yeah, just keeping on with the message. There's also a film that should be coming out soon called American Circumcision. On YouTube and find some trailers. It looks fantastic, so that should be really important. And also, if anyone's interested, I would suggest you go and look up the Global Survey of Circumcision Harm.
Well, I remember.
I think it's safe to say that MGM is going to be one of the first casualties of a feminist outlook. I think that's going to be on the way out pretty quickly, I think, and that will then prompt questions about, well, what on earth has been going on? You know, the difference in FGM and MGM. So that's another route in. Though I think the big thing is this is going to be domestic violence, but still, it's going to feature in the collapse of feminism, I think.
All right, so this is a great topic of conversation, but we do need to get moving on. Well, let's go ahead and talk about misogyny. And I want to quote your book here. Enter misogyny. This supposed phenomenon is feminist invention flying in the face of overwhelming amount of evidence and the solid theoretical explanation that in a myriad of ways the female is deferred to and privileged. Not only is there no evidence for the existence of misogyny, but the evidence points instead to the corresponding contempt towards men, misandry, being the real phenomenon. Just as would be expected in the translation psychologically into default prejudice of the biological imperative through the genetic filter, function to assess all males and to regard any and every male as defective unless there's a lot of overlapping evidence to the contrary. Now, it would seem that women have evolved with the times. Now that there's less male disposability, there are many more men for women to choose from. So instead of holding men to prove themselves to each other who gets the right to mate, it is now all men are bad until one can demonstrate that they are a cut above the rest. This has resulted in the MGTOW movement and even the grass eater men in Japan, where men don't like being labeled automatically bad and refuse to compete for female attention. Is this something for us to worry about?
Well, obviously it is. I mean, clearly something's happened. There's not been any different. This has always been the case, but we're in a situation now, a cultural situation now, across the Western world, particularly Anglophone nations, through feminism, which is just an extension, an exaggeration of biological imperative. It's just a cultural translation of it. So I don't know that much. I've been reading today about for the first time about the grass eater so-called culture in Japan, which does make sense in the same as the men go their own way, although that's more politicized. I mean, my issue with this is you don't really want to combat a ridiculous political extremism with another form of counter, essentially political extremism. Although I think MGTOW as regards, certain men have been hacked off, through divorce and been asset stripped and all that. There's some kind of individual reaction to it. But I'm pretty cagey about the whole political movement around that to actually combat feminism. I'm not sure that's a great thing. But yeah, the whole thing is a problem. But I think we're talking about pendulum swings here. We've experienced a really, really extreme pendulum swing, which has really been kicked off originally with the standard female role rather than male role becoming redundant, obviously with really super efficient labor saving devices, the pill, etc. Then the whole idea of women staying at home necessarily because it's a full-time job to be a housewife, and you'd got at least 2 kids to look after, and you hadn't got the state coming in to replace all that. When that went, that was a really, really, really big cultural shift, and I think that's what sparked off new theoretical ideas in feminism. So we've had that pendulum swing. The pendulum swing is clearly going to go massively in the direction, and probably go over in the direction as these things culturally tend to do. So yes, we're worried about it, but I think it's already got more than the seeds of its own destruction.
Now there's another quote that you have on misogyny that I also want to read as well and ask a question about. So it's assumed misogyny on examination turns out to be the antipathy mostly by other women, as for example the Demus think tank found when in 2016 it looked into the supposed phenomenon of online misogyny. The bulk, then, is female within sex competitiveness manifesting as degradation. The rest is mostly a form of policing of males. It's no surprise, though, that with the unfalsifiability of ideology on the basis of an attempt at theory, together with the evolved negative attitude towards males, that there is made to prevent the collapse of a notion of misogyny by claiming that women internalize misogyny. That it's not only committing the cardinal sin in science of non-parsimony, another big word, but the idea that women would somehow have any motivation to accept hatred towards them and then employ it against each other is beyond parody.
Yeah.
Not that the notion of misogyny itself isn't. I'm almost done. I know this is a long one. The charge of misogyny against males is itself the actual abuse and prejudice, misandry. Now, one could argue that the misogyny movement, which is really the disguise of misandry, is not only policing of men, but it's also the policing of women. If a woman disagrees with the feminist establishment, she is suffering internalized misogyny. That is the accusation. And thus her opinion holds no weight. Are we now seeing, because in your book you talk a lot about male policing, are we now seeing policing of women?
Well, you can call it policing, but it's a different thing. I mean, policing of male access to sex is foundational biology. All social system is based on restricting male access to sex. Unless they go through certain hoops, they get status, whatever, and they're assessed, you know, this is an okay guy, then man and woman have sex, fine. But most, you know, as we know from the genetic studies showing that only 40% of males ever had a child, you know, most males are excluded. So there has to be, in various forms, from biology upwards, massive policing of males. Now, there is no corresponding need for policing females, but of course, what there is within females, there is female competition particularly for male partners to pair bond with. And obviously, without going into all the section in the book about pair bonding, we do know now conclusively that pair bonding, marriage, you know, in its cultural form, very much is an evolved thing. It's not a cultural thing, and it very much evolved in the female interest for reasons we may or may not go into. So you've then got a basis for women to compete against each other to actually preference themselves for you know, getting all these guys for bare bond partners. And I purport, and I'm not the only person to put this forward, that such as FGM and face and body veiling and Chinese foot binding, for example, and also things like size zero, these are all these phenomena. They're female intersexual competition, competitiveness for pair bond partners. But apart from that, also looking at the basis of female, what I call sociality, which is a word meaning, you know, social system and dynamics amongst females. There's two things going on here, which are to some extent related, to some extent separate. We know that there's the queen bee phenomenon that, of course, in America was written about extensively. You know, Rachel Weisz and Rosalind, forget her name. Obviously, from the 90s onwards, that was a big talking topic in the States, and it is recognised there was this really quite nasty sociality amongst girls when you got this central female figure and their sidekick, and everybody else was basically trying not to upset them or actually get out of the way or whatever. And it struck me, and I've wrote about this for the first time in the book, that this is really a biological phenomenon. It's to do with the sole breeder in times of severe ecological stress, as it were. You need a situation where you can revert to just one female actually breeding and the rest just helping or getting out of the way. And that's what that's to do with. So that there's serious policing of, if you want to call it policing there. Also, you've got a situation that because males ancestrally have got to be anchored down within their own, you know, local, the village where they grew up, because they're part of the hierarchy and they can't wander off to a neighbouring village and get killed. So to avoid inbreeding, as happened otherwise, females generally have to marry out. And in preparation for that, they have to be capable of bonding closely with stranger females, non-kin females, in order for mutual child care. And they rehearse all that within girl culture, within their natal village. And again, that's all about largely exclusion. They're looking for their twosomes and threesomes, little chains of association, they're rehearsing these very close bonds, and the corollary of that is that if the females are choosing don't turn out to be good bonding material, that they then exclude them. So you've got two roots here of female sociality, unlike male sociality, which largely is, despite it being competitive, is very inclusive of exclusivity. And so you could, I think it's a misappropriation to use the term policing for that. But yes, I can see where you're coming from. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely. Now, I feel like we're getting kind of running out of time, so I think we really need to bring in domestic violence.
Yeah, big.
So I think maybe we should hand straight over to you to that.
You're not going to quote at me.
Not this time. Let's go straight for the horse's mouth.
Unfortunately,
okay, well, this I think is a central
your quotes
issue.
are like really long. It's hard to take out a specific thing because it's
be
all really good, but you can't just take out a little part.
Yeah, I'll try and summarize it quickly. I mean, I keep banging on to MRAs, and for some reason, MRAs seem to be really thick about this, and they persist with the headline stat from authorities, and I believe the figures are similar in the States to the UK. Here in the UK, our Office of National Statistics, which is the government stats arm, they regularly say that 40% of domestic violence victims are male. Right now, that itself is hidden, of course, by all these vested interest groups. We've got Women's Aid. We go over there, and there's never any talk about this. It's occasionally alluded to. I keep complaining to the BBC, and eventually they actually do discuss it, and I've been on TV about it occasionally. But that's just a headline stat. And of course, what's not mentioned is that when you do academic research about willingness to report domestic violence, particularly to police or even by anonymous survey, men compared to women are up to 10 times less likely to report. Even the ONS, they actually, in the small print, say that it's a threefold difference. So you multiply, the 40-60 divide by a threefold sex difference, then you end up overwhelmingly with the victim being male. But that's just the start of it, because we have these brilliant women researchers in domestic violence and aggression generally, Anne Campbell and Catherine Cross, university academic researchers. They find this absolutely amazing finding, and they've replicated this in several studies now, that in a couple context, unlike men, women, when they're feeling aggressive, their preferred mode of aggression is physical violence. Now, if you look at men, not in a couple context, but any context where a male would be potentially, a female would be potentially the target, in that situation, men back off. Now, these findings together are dynamite, together with what we know about male reluctance to report. But on top of that, other researchers have now found, for both males and females, both these phenomena, the actual neurohormonal basis of it. We now know that actually it's oxytocin which is behind this female behavior of being violent in couple contexts, and oxytocin does not have the same effect on guys. Instead it makes guys actually fend off stranger males. And we also now know there's an actual three-tiered, quite complex neural system in males, which is behind why males actually back off from females. We've now put all these together, we've now got a comprehensive, complete demolition of the feminist argument about domestic violence. For some reason, I'm the only person that's apart from within academia and the actual research and aggression, the only person putting this across into a public domain. And MRAs seem strangely reluctant to take this on board. It seems because MRAs have some reluctance to actually use biological arguments, and famously, of course, the Voice for Men proclaim themselves to be a humanistic organization. It's humanism that begat crap like Marxism and feminism in the first place. So the last place you want to be as your starting point is humanism. Humanism is just deism, God worship, instead of worshipping human beings. Once you start doing that, that's when you think human beings can do anything, and that's when people start to say, well, we can become Marxists, we can become feminists, we can have a separatist lesbian Shangri-La away from all that sort of thing comes from that. So this is the big number one mystery for me, why it is that people aren't embracing. This to me is the death of feminism. Once this just comes out full in the public domain, feminists are going to be persona non grata.
Speaking as, well, I view myself as an egalitarian, but I mostly work with MRAs. And, you know, reading that section of your book, talking about oxytocin, and I had a great conversation with Elizabeth about this the other day. It makes so much more sense that, you know, this oxytocin is an amazing hormone. It does a lot of different things for the body, but in the context of violence, I mean, your book almost suggests that men are not really, I mean, they have violence in them, but when they're violent to their partner, it's not the same way as women being violent to their partner.
That's right. I mean, the base of it is, for women, it seems to be homologous. It's an evolutionary extension of mammalian maternal defensive behavior. We know that female mammals are fiercely protective of their offspring for obvious reasons, and that they will, and the sort of behavior is very like women in domestic violence situations. They're not fearful at all of any retaliation because they know intuitively they're unlikely to get it. I've just lost the thread now. We talk about sorry, what was the question again?
Well, I didn't really have a question up until that point, but what I was saying is that as someone who works within the men's rights movement, I don't shy away from this, and I think this is a very important to understanding. And I can understand why some people would shy away from the biology, but the biology is where it begins. And I think it's possible, and I'm sure you're going to disagree with me, that we can be more the sum of our parts. That, you know, yes, we understand what the biology is, and if we want to be more than our biology, we need to first understand what our biology is, and we can't just ignore it because we don't like it. We've got to, you know, put a face on it. We've got to deal with it head on. And
but what you're saying is, despite that, you're saying, but what you're arguing, and what I argue against early on in the book, is you're saying, well, we can somehow build on and get around the biology and be something completely different. But that's what I think is, we're in philosophy territory rather than science now, really.
Well, actually, no, I don't think we should work around it. I think, and this is complicated, and yes, we are talking about philosophy, but I think we have to understand the biology, that if we want to be something more, it has to be in conjunction with the biology. I mean, I can't suddenly turn into a woman because biologically that's impossible.
But the problem there is, you're saying to be something more. My argument is, philosophically, that we can't be more. The reason that we have, and we could probably do a quote, as Elizabeth has done somewhere, from a book on this, and I've regularly written on this, that the reason we have evolved in the first place, the facility, the ability to have and to express culture. I mean, clearly it is something that's evolved. It's not come, you know, out from the sky. The only reason we could have been in a situation where that evolved in the first place is that it functions somehow to feed back to fine-tune and, you know, reinforce the biology. So in actual fact, the more complex through all phylogeny, you know, through evolution, through more and more complex species, and as we ourselves become, you know, evolve a bit, get more complex, as that progresses, in actual fact, rather than moving away from biology and becoming something more than biology, in actual fact, we're actually getting better at expressing our biology, if you like. We're to put it slightly pejoratively, we become ever more the slaves to our genes, just as we've become under the illusion or delusion that we're somehow becoming free of them. And even leading thinkers like Daniel Dennert, who's a leading philosopher on evolution, he wrote a book called Freedom Evolves. Now, of course, he's right, freedom does evolve, but what evolves is the ability to be much more flexible in how we, rather than just being a straightforward, you know, reflex response. We can go around the houses, and in doing that, we can actually better achieve our basic biological, motivations, our goals. So in a sense, we escape it, they become more flexible, but in the deep understanding of it, we become actually, if you like, it's the wrong way of putting it, but more biological. So to become more than biological, we don't become actually ever more biological, if anything.
Okay, I'm just going to clarify real quick because I see where I'm getting the confusion here. Because my grandparents were farmers, and nowadays there's really no opportunities to be a farmer. What was expected of us within the gender roles that we had 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, doesn't exist today, which forces us evolve with the times.
Yeah.
And our genetics over the span of the human history of 10,000 or 100,000 years ago has been built around doing these tasks that went relatively unchanged for the majority of it. Only within the last 100 years has that started to change. But I do agree with you that what we're seeing now in our evolution, culturally, socially, technologically, we're not getting away from our genetics. We're still within the realm of genetics. It's just they're being used in a different way in our context of our society. That no longer do we need to be big and strong. Now we need to be smart to be able to use a computer, to be able to use the phone, an iPhone. We have to adapt to that. And I think that's what I was talking about, being more than what we were.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Being more than what our ancestors were is what I was really getting at.
I see that. Yes, and that's quite right. Just quickly going back to domestic violence, just in case anybody's on the misapprehension, because obviously I'm not claiming that. I'm claiming that there's only an actual etiology, actual biological-based causation for partner violence in women. There's not something still in men, but that does not mean, of course, that there isn't domestic violence perpetrated by men, because although they've got this inbuilt inhibition, of course they can be disinhibited classically by having a bad day at the office, going to the bar, having 3 or 4 or 10 beers, and coming back home, and they're up for aggression, male, get back home. Only person there is another female, and because their normal mechanisms have been shut down by all the alcohol, then by displacement, as it were, they take it out on the wife. That's the classic, wife beating situation. So that's disinhibition. You can get psychopaths who are violent to everybody, male and female. So they've lost their disinhibition in another way. So there are clearly occasions where you're going to get male on female domestic violence. The point is that's an aberration. It's normal males in normal situations ain't going to do that, but the situation is very different for female on male, where it's normal a female, given that she's in a situation where she's feeling aggressive, that aggression then manifests actually as physical violence. Because that's the thing. That's going to be a hard thing to get over, and you can see feminist retorts saying, "Are you denying the existence of male perpetrated domestic violence?" That'll be the way that they actually try and tackle it, of course.
Oh yeah, they're going to have a lot of problem with that. I can see it now.
Well, conversely, we're going to have a lot of problem in actually putting that across for that reason. That's my point.
Yeah, no, you're perfectly right on that one. I mean, your book goes into great explanation of that. It's a little bit hard to get through, but it's worth reading. That intimate partner violence is I should add here primarily
it's important that that section, it's actually a fairly short section on domestic violence, but the 2 or 3 preceding sections about where pair bonding, what is and why do we have pair bonding, that's the necessary context. Once you understand that pair bonding very much is in the female interest, and that females are much more worried than males about losing the pair bond, and therefore the controlling behavior that you often get within a pair bond is overwhelmingly usually by the female and not the male. And we know there's plenty of research showing that controlling behavior translates into physical violence. That, together with the section on domestic violence, I think that's, once you understand that as a whole, then it makes a lot more sense, I think.
No, yeah, that's definitely true. And when I was reading that section, my first thought was jealousy, that women are prone to jealousy so much more than men are. I mean, I've certainly dated women that just got so easily jealous if I even talked to another girl. And yet I was supposed to, as a male, be 100% comfortable if they talked to another man, which I was. I didn't care because, you know, I trust them. But it was like, if I talk to another girl, oh no, I suddenly am this horrible person.
Yeah, but at the same time, there's a lot of research done about jealousy, and clearly males are very jealous, but it's in a different way. And again, this relates to biology. There's lots of studies now, and there's other things showing that there's definitely a big sex difference here. What men are bothered about is sexual infidelity, i.e., the woman having extra pair of sex, a one-night stand. That can be a complete deal breaker for the guy, because obviously, if you look at it evolutionarily, there's a risk there that the genes from another party is coming in to the pair bond, and the guy's going to, you know, be there while his female's gestating and giving birth and rearing a complete, you know, another man's child. No woman risks that. I mean, the guy can have as many one-night stands as he like. He's not going to bring some woman's alien genes into the pair bond to have kids by. So what correspondingly, what makes females jealous is guys seemingly on the cusp of deserting them, which is why, you know, the stand by a man actually works. If the guy goes on a few one-night stands, well, heck, more than anything, that's establishing his virility. He's not a threat to the pair bond, because implicitly, intuitively, women know the guys aren't deserting him. It's just a safety valve thing, really. It doesn't mean the guy's doesn't want in parallel with that a loving long-term relationship, right? But if it looks like he's having a full-blown affair and he's thinking of defecting into a replacement pair bond, that's what really gets the jealousy going in women. Now, of course, the reality within the pair bond situation is it's the sexual infidelity that more commonly occurs. But again, that's another dynamic which feeds into the domestic violence business. So again, that can precipitate men can get really seriously alarmed about women going off and having extra pair sex, and that can obviously trigger domestic violence, and that could probably overcome the inhibition guys have. So I'm sort of contradicting a bit what you said there, that yeah, women get jealous big time, but there's a situation where guys are too.
Well, and I think you said that, you know, there's a difference between the aggression of women and aggression of males. And I think one good example of that, there was a study that's been done, and I think your book mentioned this as well, that men, when they commit domestic violence, it tends to be more on the mild side. But when women commit domestic violence, it tends to be on the more severe side.
That's right. I mean, this is actually a bit understudied. There's a study which is not that new now, which says that the rates of, if you look at serious injury only, that it's runs 5 times the rate for men compared to women. Well, there are other studies suggesting it's not as big as that. This is the other big quandary in domestic violence, which is not alluded to, that even if you assume similar levels of perpetration, male on female, as female on male, again, going back to what we talked about Army and Fire Service, you know, the strength differential and the weakness differential. So you've got superior male upper body strength, hitting power. You've got very much female frame weakness. Multiply those together, and Louise Dixon, psychologist at Birmingham University, has looked into this, and she reckons you'd expect a 20-fold sex differential injury. In other words, 20 times as much injury amongst women domestic violence victims as amongst men. But when you actually look at the stats, across all levels of injury, it's roughly parity. Maybe 3-2 female on male, or more, usually nearer parity. But again, if you actually strip out the more minor injury, look at the more serious injury, then it seems to be males actually predominantly victims. So that's the final nail in the coffin, I think, of the feminist model of the gender paradigm model of domestic violence. But I've slightly gone off your point there, haven't I?
Oh, no, we're good. I mean, that's just it's necessary to hear all of this. And,
yeah, your point was about the nature of it. I think it's true to say that women are no holds barred, but of course the exception to that, if you've got a male psychopath or a male who's had 10 pints down the pub and is already on top of a bad day at the office, then obviously once the inhibitions are down, which normally are there in normal males at normal times, then of course the males can do obviously serious damage. But the issue is that women seem to be normally, and I've been in a situation, obviously the slap thing, but having heavy kitchen objects chucked at you is no joke, and that's quite a routine thing. My father, I mean, my mother had no domestic violence at all, except on the rare occasion my mother had chucked a very heavy item at my dad, and he said afterwards, luckily it missed him. But so the situation where in a relatively normal context serious injury could result, that's normal in the female on male direction. In the male on female direction, of course, there's most of it is males trying to restrain their aggressive female partner and possibly cause an injury in the process of restraint. But it has to be an extreme situation of major disinhibition for males to actually let loose and use normal male power and actually cause damage, I think.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the Ray Rice incident, which was just a travesty in all reality. But what I remember from the video, like the complete video, is that the woman was doing everything she could to hurt him. She was pushing him, she was slapping him, what have you, and all he did to her was hit her once, and she went down, and he stopped. And I'm willing to bet if the situation was reversed and that he went down, she would have kept on him because she really wanted to hurt him. Now, what he was doing was pacifying behavior, but he still came under a lot of heat because you just don't hit women, even when a woman is hitting you. And I just hate that our society has evolved to that because, when I was growing up, I was always taught if someone hits you, you hit them back, except a woman. You never hit a woman, ever.
Well, that's right. And same in the UK, it's really, really seriously ingrained. But I'd say it's not just the culture. It's obviously that's the cultural superstructure, but it's deeply ingrained. As I said, there's this that we now know there's this 3-tier, quite complex neural structure, which is specifically in males only to do with inhibiting nerves. It's really quite deep biology, and presumably it must go back down through the biology, down through evolutionary history, through to quite primitive species. So it's really deeply ingrained, and the more deeply ingrained the biology, then the more elaborate you'd expect the translation into culture to be. Now,
I'm going to just keep talking, so I'm going to shut up now and give it to my other panelists. Do you guys have anything you want to add to this conversation?
Silence.
We always mansplain them, but when we give them a chance to speak, they never want to.
I'm sorry.
I've never heard Elizabeth.
Well, I was just paying attention to what Paper Ghost was saying in the chat, honestly. I'm sorry. But,
Elizabeth's not usually short of words. Elizabeth, you got nothing to add? I think you're on mute, Elizabeth.
Yeah, she's talking, but she's on mute.
You're on mute, Elizabeth.
Oops.
Here we go. Yeah.
Twice. Yeah, I would just say all that I would like to add to that is that, there's a really mind-blowing sort of part of the book where you take this all back to the kind of cellular level. Talking about?
Are you talking about sexual conflict?
Yeah.
Yeah, I still remember that bit. I mean, I've written about this in a paper before. It's within biology. There's it's one of these assumptions that there is such thing as sexual conflict. I mean, and they're on various levels. I mean, the obvious level. I mean, the great example everybody knows, I think, is lions, right? That when a more dominant male lion actually kills another male lion who's already in a is it pair bond? It's pair bond to a degree. It's got its own family. Then the usurping male typically will actually, if the offspring are young enough, it'll actually kill them. Infanticide, right? And this is often cited as the ultimate sexual conflict. I mean, clearly that is not in the immediate interest of the female of the lioness. Clearly isn't. But of course, if you pull the lens out and look at what's actually going on here, right? Now, lions as a species have a pretty tough time, actually, because, of course, the young are effectively functionally useless in terms of actually killing prey until they're really well into adulthood. So all the prey to feed them has got to be killed by the mother. So a lot of those offspring are just going to die of starvation. So if the father of that offspring is replaced by actually a considerably superior in terms of set of genes male, he then immediately impregnates. Okay, he's killed the offspring. He then impregnates the mother, and she has another litter. Now, the genetic quality of this new litter is going to be quite a bit better, and that could make all the difference in terms of survival. So, in the medium longer term view, in actual fact, this benefits the female. So where biologists might term this sexual conflict, the real conflict here, of course, is between the males, right? So what is purported to be a sexual conflict situation actually is one of male intersexual competition. And there are other situations where sexual conflict resolves into female intersexual competition. And there is, as Elizabeth just referred to, there was until recently a quite well-regarded theory, the origin of sex, not the sexes. The origin of sex came before actual separate sexes, as far as we know at the moment. And there was idea of intergenomic conflict or parasitism, or one or two different theories coming around. And we now know that's unlikely to be true. There's another theory to replace it. So at whatever level you look at this notion of sexual conflict, and researchers have actually written on this recently, and they've begun to question it and saying, well, actually, if you look down, then yes, there is a problem with this. So overall, now it looks like we're going to lose eventually from biology this whole notion of sexual conflict. And of course, this really is an underpinning of the whole feminist project, their idea of oppression of one sex by the other. If you even remove the underlying biology of the notion of sexual conflict altogether, then that really is the complete destruction of the whole feminist philosophy. So, which is why I think it's important, and why I tagged it on as a chapter at the end of the book, even though it's quite a difficult concept and it's quite difficult to get your head around. I think you find that, Elizabeth, that was quite a difficult chapter, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a big surprise as well, to be honest. It's apart from the rest of the book, I found.
I think it's fair to say it's probably the most controversial, and certainly I would say most biologists, and of course they got one up and they are actually, those doing the primary research, they would say, well, this is a concept which we do find useful and is evident in, but again, at the same time, they're still using it as an a priori concept, and as such, it's always open to question, and I would say it's not being questioned enough. So to pull back a bit, I would say probably the jury's out. I've put forward an argument. I think it's a sound argument. It may be that I possibly exaggerated a bit, and it may be that's going to stay within biology, and biologists aren't going to abandon it. But I think there's a strong potential that that the whole idea, once all the politics goes, because you got to appreciate that the scientists are just as vulnerable as everybody else to the imposition from on high of political imperative, and very much the political imperative from Marxism and neo-Marxism and what PC identity politics is, that this thing of conflict between the sexes, and they've taken that on board, and they realise that people relate to this, and therefore they couch their studies in these terms, and of course it feeds back to getting funding streams, etc., etc. So, but I think once all this cultural nonsense goes out the way, then I think that sort of concept might be re-examined. I don't know, but certainly that is where I'm most out on a limb in the book. I will concede that.
Well, I want to discuss one final point of your book. I mean, there's so much good stuff in it.
Glad to hear it. It's a difficult book, isn't it? I mean, I need to write a popular version of this, which is about 3 times the length and about 1/10 the difficulty.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a very smart person, and yet I had to reread sections over and over again. But
tell me about it. I have to reread science articles sometimes 5-6 times. But go on.
But the last point I want to bring up is, in the book you talk about the show The Weakest Link.
Yes.
And I thought this was a very true thing that I've seen before. About this, for those who don't know, there was a study done where I guess it was 2 women who analyzed the show The Weakest Link and found that men were very protective of women, that they would vote off other men before they would vote off other women, unless women were really doing badly. But women seem to be a bit more indiscriminate. They would vote men and women off indiscriminately, but seem to have more protection of other women than compared to men. But in all of that you're discussing, one thing I kept thinking about was there's this Survivor show in a Dutch Survivor, where they separated men and women on separate islands. And the men, being just all men, got right to work. They built huts, they built tables, they built just all sorts of things to, make their stay there tolerable. Women, just all women, did nothing. All they did was argue, and when they weren't arguing, they were sunbathing. And eventually, to get the show moving forward, they took one man from the men's group and one woman from the women's group and swapped them. And the moment the man got there, the women demanded he do everything while they still did nothing. And I wanted to know if you heard about that before, and what are your thoughts?
Not until I just read your you put it in an email to me earlier, and that's the first I've heard about it. I'd love to see this. So what happened to the solo woman on the men's island then? Did she get asked to do all the housework?
Not really. I mean, they assigned her to do jobs, like there was like some haircutting done that she did. She did very menial, little small jobs.
Did she whine about sexual harassment?
I don't think she did. I think she was just happy that she could have a roof over her head, and that she was grateful to even do the smallest tasks.
Yeah. But of course,
they didn't ask her to do any hard work.
Yeah, but of course, we're very separate phenomena. I mean, the island experiment is the sexes on their own. Obviously, the difference is the great thing about the weakest link thing is it encapsulates. It's like a laboratory experiment for what happens when you've got multi-female, a group which is multi-male, multi-female, which of course is what society widely is. So it's like a microcosm of society as a whole. So you could then apply whatever theories you've got about how females behave with each other, how males behave with each other, how males and females behave with each other in the context of others of both sexes. So it gets quite complicated, and I've tentatively in the book tried to go through what I think happened. And of course, because there's different stages in the quiz, was first of all, because you're not aiming for yourself to get the prize money. The first half of the show, you are genuinely collectively trying to just bump up the ultimate prize, whoever gets it. So that does actually make things a bit simpler. And of course, the dynamics do get more complicated later on. But I think the show does illustrate all of the theories of interaction that I put forward in the book. But of course, there needs to be other studies on that to actually test those. You need to look at the alternatives and tease them out. But it's a highly interesting. There's going to be a big feature, I think, in looking at all this, and it's going to be done by lots of psychology departments have big work psychology sub-departments for obvious reasons. It's really important. People have realised that men and women are badly affected in the workplace by having both sexes in the workplace. It doesn't really work very well, and they're trying to work out how they can get around that. And it's going to be a massive importance to get corporations to be and public sector workplaces to work efficiently. So I think there's going to be an awful lot of academic research now, which is like applied science in this area, and that's going to be a big news for actually more understanding about human sociality, looked at from the perspective of two different sexes rather than what's happened so far, which is all this unisex nonsense.
Well, something that I heard about, and I haven't been able to find research on it, but I believe it to be true, is they once took this group of students, all male students, and put them into a classroom where there are no women at all, and found that boys were actually doing better. And I'm kind of in favor of this idea of having a segregation of genders. And I know that sexist, sorry. And I know that's a controversial subject there, but if it actually improves academic scores, why aren't we doing this?
There's plenty of research on this, as well as obviously lots of actual practical experience for both. Single sex for both sexes actually works better. I mean, feminists and less politicized researchers all say that for females, single sex schools work. I mean, they give all sorts of pejorative political reasons for it. But equally, for males, it's better because you haven't got the distraction of. Obviously, males are going to play up to try and get the attention of the females, and they're going to play up in ways which is not related to the work. Obviously, they can obviously batten down to the actual work and just a male status pyramid within the classroom much more easily if they're just there on their own. So it's obviously a way forward. Obviously, the counter to that is, well, you need kids, if their main social activity is within the school, you've got to have the opposite sex there to socialize them for later life. But as against that, as we know, socialization very much from toddler age onwards is within sex, because the sexes self-segregate. And again, it's not a cultural impact. This is just from biology. From toddler age, males play with males, females play with females. So again, that fits into this. Most of school really should be same sex for that reason. You can do things to bring the sexes together outside school, quite easily. And obviously, as it gets to adolescence, naturally, males and females form crowds, which are precursors to pairing off. So, and so maybe you could argue that at a certain point in late middle school, you should have the sexes together for that reason. But again, you can have them out, together outside of school in activities. Within school, if you're going to seriously improve performance of Western kids, as opposed to all these Asian kids who are really, in comparison, really high flyers, we're going to have to go back to this thing, really, because the West is going to fall behind economically really seriously unless this is done. So I think that in the end will make sure that we do have sex segregation, I think.
I think it might be even beneficial to even do it part-time or have extracurricular activities where there's gender or sex-specific learning, just focusing on how they learn and how they learn differently. Yeah. And then even if it was like I said, part-time in school, I think that would for both sexes. I think it would increase learning
And
ability.
a point there being, apart from the social dynamics, as you pointed out, there's well researched now that the learning styles are very different to the sexes. So particularly young lads, they need to do physical activity. So if you can do stuff rather than sat at a desk where you're spending all the time just trying to control and keep them quiet, and they're resisting that. So the whole dynamic is all about that rather than anything they're actually learning. If you actually structure the learning around what they naturally want to do, which is physical, interact with other guys and physically doing and building things, the guy's going to learn, because and girls learn in totally different ways. They want to be in their twosomes and threesomes, and they're quite happy to sit relatively quiet. So yeah, and again, the case there for rather than actually segregate the sexes come secondary school, you could argue that it's more important to segregate them actually in primary school. Yes, for these learning style differences as well as actually the natural social dynamics.
Well, and I think Christina Hoff Sommers talked about that in her book, A War on Boys, where the education system has been redefined to be more for girls, that is the default. So if a boy acts like a boy, then he needs to be medicated. And we need to take away any activity, like taking away tag, because it singles people out. And it's like, so what? That's kind of the point. You don't want to be it, so you go and run after someone else. It's physical activity, even to the point of reducing recess, or in some schools, taking it away altogether. And there are times I disagree with Christina Hoff Sommers, but, with that book, it really does seem like we want boys to fail in society so girls can do better.
Yeah, and of course, another factor there, happens in secondary school particularly, is the whole move to continuous assessment away from exams, because we know there's a big sex difference here. Continuous assessment is very much suited to girls, whereas exams, again, because it's a sort of fairly intensive competition situation, it's going to much more favour boys. So just that alone is seriously disadvantage boys, and must be a major reason why you've got so many more females now than males going to university.
We're going to go ahead and wrap up at this time. I'll go ahead and start with Elizabeth. Is there anything you want to conclude, wrap up, anything you want to say?
No, I think the only thing that occurred to me during our discussion that I didn't get to say was very early on, actually, when we were talking about feminist mental gymnastics. A really funny thing happened yesterday. I went to see The Red Pill, and there was a debate after, a really good debate with a couple of feminists, and they got challenged on the notion of patriarchy and what it is, and their response was to say that, well, actually it's not really anything to do with gender, it's all socio-economic. So on that little giggle, I think I'll end.
What was the film like? Did you really enjoy it?
What, did the feminists enjoy it?
No, I'm saying, was the film really good, The Red Pill? I've not seen it, obviously.
It's a really good film, yeah. But it's kind of, it's not going to have any new information in for you, Steve.
No.
But you can take some people to see it who are uninitiated in all of this stuff.
It's going to be shown, a special screening in Manchester here. So, and somebody's getting me a ticket for it, so I'm hoping to go along to it.
Yeah, I'm sending a couple of my friends to go and see it in Manchester, and they're uninitiated, so I'm looking forward to seeing their minds blown by it. It's a very, very enjoyable film and really well put together.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
He's done a grand job on it. Just won a load of awards from the Idlewild Film Festival.
Well, that's great. I saw her interviewed, the director. I saw her interviewed. I thought she gave quite a weak interview, actually, but she could just have had an off day.
Well, I'm sure she's been overwhelmed by all of this. I mean, the response alone. I mean, I hosted a film festival for The Red Pill in Philadelphia. And I've been wondering, is this actually a common thing with independent films, or is the red pill somehow more special that so many are coming forward trying to do as many releases as possible? And I would love to ask Cassie J that, but that's neither here nor there. But
yeah,
email her until she responds.
I don't want to bug her. But what about
Elizabeth said about said that the film wouldn't interest me. This is a problem actually.
Oh, I don't say it wouldn't interest you because it's.
No, I know what you're saying. But this is my problem, you see, because I'm deep in all this biology stuff, and I do get impatient. I mean, I got impatient with some people on the Voice for Men. I'm now actually in the ignoble position of being banned from the Voice for Men website, in common with most people that didn't much to do with it. I understand it. So there's this is an area. This is why I've actually always held back from being involved from the actual activism. I thought my role, I'm not a very good front man anyway. I thought my role really is to provide a resource. There's nobody else that's doing it. I thought I'll provide the resource, but it does mean I get into a highfalutin world of my own, really. And then when you try to get out, and like when you're publicising a book, whatever, and then you suddenly realise, hang on a bit, I've gone up my own arse here a bit, and I need to get out. I need to get out more and interact with people and recognise that these people have not read this science, and it takes them a while to get their head around it. And I need to spend time now, actually not dumbing down, but it'll be 2 or 3 years hence. I think I'm going to work a lot on doing a genuinely popular book that people can read fairly easily and not have to have to reread 3 or 4 times to actually understand what the hell I'm talking about.
Well,
on Amazon, by the way, I wanted to ask you: is it like downloadable or?
Oh yes, the idea was. It was commissioned by New Mail Studies. It's a really excellent journal. I published a lot of my papers in there, and they asked me, not my idea, said they wanted to start doing a series of books. What's it called? Monographs, as they're called in academic circles. And they wanted mine to be the first one, so I agreed to that, obviously, and did it, and it's out. So it's actually downloadable on their website. So you don't have to buy it. That's the thing. Cool. The idea, what we're after, we're not actually making money. We're trying to cover the production costs. So it's on it by CreateSpace. It's on Amazon.co.uk.com as a book you can buy. It's print on demand, and I've got some. It works out. It's great actually, but we just want readership. We're not interested in making money. We want people to read it. So if people don't want to buy it, that's fine. Just go and download it, and you can download it as a PDF, and then convert it to stick it on your e-reader.
Yeah, but saying that, I think it's although it's a difficult read, it's a really worthwhile read, and it's also worthwhile getting the carbon copy because there are so many studies referenced in it, and it's really something that you want to keep going back to and opening up and exploring.
Well, that's what I hope. Sorry?
Well, I do want to say something because you say that you sometimes get a little impatient because sometimes people don't focus on the biology. And I want to say, too, that I don't think it's entirely people's fault that they don't focus on the biology, especially here in the U.S. I can't speak for UK. But, I'm a writing mentor. I mentor other writers and help them out and all of that. And one of the lessons I do is I talk about senses. And I'm like, how many senses do you have? And the answer they always give is 5. And I'm like, would you believe you have 20 senses? And they're blown away by something that should be very basic, something that should be taught, and it's not. That in our current society, biology doesn't even take the backseat. It's buried in the backyard. So I think a lot of the difficulties that you encounter about biology is that our society as a whole is taught not to give a shit about it.
Yeah, but I think I also have personal defects. I mean, it's ironic that I write about the genetic filter. I have this year been diagnosed with a single gene fault, NF1, neurofibromatosis type 1, which I've got a specific tiny difficulty in one aspect of working memory, face and name blindness, but also various social difficulties, which are a bit like very mild Asperger's. And this is why I'm a backroom boy rather than a front man, as it were. And it does explain why I do sometimes piss off people, as I've pissed off a Voice for Men, unfortunately. So I need to actually, in my old age, actually get better on that front. So things like this, getting out more and engaging with people and trying to understand where other people are coming from. I need to do a lot more of that, I think. So anybody watching this who I have peed off in the past, then please accept my apologies, and I will be making efforts to actually be a bit more normal. But then again, if I was normal, I wouldn't be writing these books, would I? So it swings around about, really.
Well, I'm hoping that this will be the beginning for you for this book on getting you on other channels. I'm going to share this with all the major YouTube personalities I know, but I also recommend maybe you contacting like Sargon of Akkad. Oh, I just forgot his name.
Can you email me about that?
What's up?
Can you email me about that? Tell me about it later. I'd love to follow that up, because I owe it to the Nemo Studies guys. Obviously, got to get his production costs back, and it, also I'm on a learning curve with social media. I've only recently actually got to use my own homepage on Facebook, so I need to get ready for when I get the popular book out. This is a learning curve, so it's all good stuff, and it's starting to get fun as well. I mean, I do quite, despite my genetic deformity, I do quite enjoy interacting with people. As Elizabeth can testify, I was with her at the Battle of Ideas Festival in London at Barbican recently, which is a great time, and. Also in England, we've got N4M, Network for Men, and I'm actually meeting, this is an internet resource to put guys who obviously isolated themselves. So we're meeting people here in Sheffield and guys in Nottingham to meet people. And so we're getting now beginnings of a social network for anti-feminists. It's a sort of wide group, and that's a great development. So I think on all fronts, really, things are up. The danger is that in any grouping like this, natural male status competition. So you got like Mr. Elam, and people are obviously sort of want their position, and then as a perceived rival, guys like me get pushed out. So I then react to that as taking a back seat. Okay, I'll be the backroom guy, and I'll be happy with that. So I suspect I won't get anywhere to the fore in men's rights activism, and I'll keep just providing a resource. But I do want to get involved and out there and talking with people and giving talks and things. Maybe I should do YouTube vids. Maybe I put a mask on and do YouTube. I should get out doing more on that, maybe.
That sounds like a good idea. Vanessa, is there any final things you want to say? Because we do really need to wrap this up. Vanessa's
looking at something else. I need to get some food.
She's on the phone right now, so
on the phone, right?
we'll just I'll speak for her. You know, I'm a man.
You gotta do it in a girly voice, though.
I think that's going to do it for us today.
Right.
I'm just looking at Vanessa right now. Okay, so anyways. Steve, I thank you for coming out today. I only meant to do an hour today, and we easily stretched this into 2 hours, but we had a lot of really great discussions today.
I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Now, you mentioned that we can get your book on Amazon, which I did provide the link down below. When I'm done with this, I will get the link for the new Male Studies website, where they can also get the book for free, and I'll put that down there. But if anyone out there gets a chance to look at this book, I highly recommend it. I mean, I was so moved by the book, I started posting pictures of it on Facebook to get people to read this, because it just blew my mind. I thought I knew a lot about this stuff, and I just felt like I was in a high school biology class all over again. I was just learning so much new stuff.
It's going to be a word of mouth thing, isn't it? In the same way the woman racket took a while to, I mean, that was starting from at least people see this as son of woman racket. So quite a few, straight away we sold quite a few copies by people who bought the woman racket, wanted to buy a new book. So you know, it was a slow business getting the woman racket going, although it was actually properly published through Imprint Academic. It took quite a while. And of course, all the mainstream media, bar one outlet, refused to have anything to do with it, and it got lots of hatchet jobs in social media as well. But things are changing a bit. Reception's a bit better for this, but I'm learning, and hopefully in say 2 or 3 years hence, when the popular book comes out, that it's change a bit, and it will take off a bit better.
Vanessa, was there any final thoughts you wanted to give on this?
Yeah, I'm sorry. My roommate came in freaking out about her taxes. It's that time of year. But yeah, I mean, it sounds like I really need to read that book. I think I'd enjoy it because you know what? I was really quiet just because I was listening to everything you were saying, trying to soak it in. But yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to check that out.
But
all the points in or the stream.
But what I need is obviously feedback, because it's often feedback from people who aren't actually scientists themselves, have not really looked into all these things. Often what people think are, you know, it's famous in science that what might be classed as dumb questions actually turn out to be the really important ones and really set you thinking. And the more feedback I get from people, you know, just email me email me anytime. The email's regularly available on the website, everywhere, and in the book. Just email me any questions. And I don't mind being insulted. I don't mind people actually whatever. I mean, obviously constructive as far as possible, but it's the only way that I constantly have to. When you're out on a limb like this, you have to constantly re-examine. You can't just look for confirmation bias. The danger in all this, you have to constantly ask yourself, have I got something in here wrong? Was that one wrong thing can actually bring house the cards down? So I need to look at this all the time. And for when I get the next book out, I've got to have my ducks in a row even more than I've got at the moment.
That is a great philosophy to have. I know a lot of writers, a lot of beginning writers, they don't even have that mindset. They think anything they write is just pure gold and will sell millions. And it's like you're like, you know what? I could be wrong about something. Let me know.
Well, that's what I do with all my papers. I mean, I spend most of my time researching contra ideas, thinking, you know, there must be something I've got wrong here. And, you know, so when I'm researching a paper, 2/3 of the time is actually looking at rival views and seeing, well, have they got this right? Or, you know, is this fact, am I missing this fact or whatever? And you have to do that, because otherwise you run the risk, particularly as an outsider as I am. Yeah, as soon as you start publishing something and you get something major wrong, then that's going to be a problem with the feature. So luckily, so far, I've managed to avoid doing that. So I mean, look, may run out sooner or later, I don't know. But I think I've done most of the major review research now, and I'm going to concentrate on working towards the next book, I think, rather than actually. So I think I've researched all the main avenues now.
We need to go ahead and end the show right now, so I'm going to go ahead and do my closing. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. We got a lovely bunch of people in our chat, so that was a great delight there. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Elizabeth, for coming out. You're definitely invited back. There's just so much to discuss in this book, but I mean, I probably want your opinion on a lot of other things that's not in your book. So you both were a great delight to have.
Well, thank you.
Should come back sometime.
Just real quick, and please keep it short. I know you two love to talk a lot. Where can we find you? Starting with you, Elizabeth. Where can we find you online?
You can email me too. I am antifembot@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter @antifembot, and I'm Elizabeth Catherine Hobson on Facebook.
And I've got sorry.
I was just going to say, Quick thanks to Boobs and thanks to Dick for having me as well. It's been a pleasure.
You can find me. I've got a website with all my papers on, and it's only it's stevemoxon.co.uk. Got a blog site, but that's it's not often used. And obviously, most of my papers are on the New Male Studies website as well. But I thoroughly enjoyed being on here, and I want to do. I did a little bit of this sort of thing, the woman racket, but not too much. I want to do more of it. So, but I've thoroughly enjoyed myself, and thanks to you two very much indeed for hosting.
All right, so you can check out the link down below for the Amazon. I will update for the New Male Study. Also, you can check out Modern Medusa's channel down there as well. Also, check out my Patreon. I'm raising money to get myself insurance and a new computer so I can do better videos to get better medical insurance. It's going towards my disability. If you're not comfortable doing Patreon, perfectly understandable. Below that is my book, Vampires, 14th Century, Bubonic Plague, all the fun stuff. The first book is free. The second book comes like a month later, $2.99. So if you're not comfortable doing Patreon, consider buying my book. That's going to do it for all of us here today. I am Dix.
And I'm Boobs.
And I'm Steve.
And I hope everyone has a good day.